I recently had a conversation with some colleagues about whether web developers often use offline data. And my initial response was no, but on thinking about it, there's actually a pattern that I have implemented quite a few times that I wanted to discuss in this video. So when I used to work at Dev2, I implemented this editor. The really cool feature is that if you type in it and then refresh the page, your text reloads in. And this is a really important pattern because you don't want a person to spend an hour on a blog post and then accidentally click out of the tab and delete the data. Or what if they lose internet access? This is becoming more and more of a common pattern on websites where they have an offline fallback. So if the user goes off the page without saving the data, it automatically saves for them. And usually this is implemented using local storage, but we're going to use a different tool today called AWS Amplify DataStore. And it's going to handle a lot of the offline online logic for us so that we don't need to do that. This offline data pattern is even more important in certain industries. So medical systems, finance, and mining, for example, data loss could make it so that there are really bad consequences. So it's really important for those types of systems that it stays online. So in this tutorial, we'll be building an online-offline editor. And when a user exits the page, their partially completed form data will be saved and loaded back in the form automatically if they come back to the page. The in-progress code or the in-progress draft will be flagged as such so that that's the one loaded in, not one of the ones that is actually saved. When you deal with online-offline data, you are essentially dealing with a distributed system, which means that all the rules for distributed systems come into play and things become a little bit more complicated. For an app with a front end, we have to think about the cap theorem. So the cap theorem states that a system can only have 2 out of the 3: partition tolerance, consistency, and availability. Just having a front end means that we need partition tolerance, so there's a server and a client, 2 partitions at the very minimum. We've also said that we want our data to be available offline and online, and so we sacrifice full consistency and use eventual consistency instead. So eventually all the data stored offline and online will match, but not necessarily instantaneously. This eventual consistency can make the programming model pretty difficult for developers. So we'll be using AWS Amplify DataStore, which will handle a lot of this logic for us. It will automatically sync the data if the user goes offline. First, it will run a query or a mutation on data in indexed.db, which is an in-browser data storage similar to something like local storage. It just can store more data. And it also has asynchronous updating. So unlike local storage that is synchronous, it is asynchronous. It does have a more complex API though, so DataStore abstracts that. It also automatically syncs the data to the cloud using your AWS database of choice. We'll use DynamoDB today. So the first thing that we're going to do is create a data model. So I'm going to go to sandbox.amplifyapp.com and I'll click Get Started and do data. We're going to keep this simple. We'll just have a note. And that note will have a title, a body, and then draft. Draft will be a Boolean. So a post will either be a draft or not a draft. I'm going to make that one required. This is using the Amplify admin UI. I have a bunch of other videos on my channel using this. I'll link to my first one below. So next I'm going to go to test locally in your app. And for this, I'll go straight to deploying. I could actually build this whole application without deploying my backend. It just wouldn't show the online-offline capabilities. So I'll go ahead and deploy. But again, you could build out this whole thing without deploying anything. The data then would just be only available offline, not online. So now I have to come up with an app name. I will name it Offline Online Notes. And you can also pick a deployment region. I'll go with US East 1, just wherever you're closest. And this will deploy. While this finishes deploying, I'm going to go ahead and set up my project. So I will link this starter down below, but this is essentially just a vanilla JavaScript starter, so no React or Vue or anything like that. You could use React or Vue to implement this same pattern, but I'm just going to use vanilla JavaScript for the sake of this tutorial. That being said, we do need a bundler, so this has parcel pre-set up and also has TypeScript compiling. So that's why I'm using this instead of just creating an index.html file. I'm going to clone this repository that I just created. And now we'll wait till this deploys. We'll go ahead and set this up locally. So I'm going to copy this command from the top here, paste it right here. It'll ask me to verify, and I logged in. Now I'll type in my info. I'll also need to install the AWS Amplify libraries and TypeScript. Now I'll open up my text editor for the project. Now we'll go to our JavaScript file. We'll import Amplify and DataStore from AWS Amplify. We'll also import the configuration from the AWS exports file. We'll import the note model from the models directory. It's a TypeScript version of our schema. Then I'll run amplify configure on the configuration file. This will connect my front end to my back end. Now I'm going to hop over to my index.html. And here I'm going to create a form. I'm going to create fields on it. So the first one will be title. And body. I'll also add a submit button. I'll start my development server so that I can make sure that what I'm doing is actually working. So now my server is running. You can see that my form has been created. I'm going to change this to a text area. Now I'm going to go back to my JavaScript and add a function that listens for the create form to submit. And I'm going to add an asynchronous event here. I'll add a try catch. I'll console error the error if one occurs. I'll prevent the default form submission refresh. I'll select the value of the title form. And I'll do the same for body. And when it's submitted, I'll create a new note. So I'm going to create a new note with the title, the body, and that it is not a draft. Then I'll console log it. Let's test this out. We can see that a new note was console logged with the correct title and body, and that it's not a draft. Now, the first thing that we need to do is create an empty draft. What we're going to do is have one draft load in that has blank data and draft set to true. We're going to create this draft automatically if one doesn't exist already. Then we'll have our other ones that are not drafts with draft set to false. We'll create a global variable for the draft. It'll be an empty object. Then when the page loads, we'll add a function so we'll query DataStore for the note. And we only want the draft, so we'll make sure that draft is equal to true. DataStore has its own query language. I'll link it to the docs that have this information. We'll also create a new function that will create a new blank draft. And that will look almost identical to this, so I'll copy and paste it to start. But I don't want the information from here. I just want the title to be set to empty. There won't be an event object either. The body will also be set to empty, and draft will be set to true. I'll also want to manipulate that global variable. So now we want to add a conditional. If this drafts array is empty, we want to create a new draft. So we always want there to be one draft. But if there is a draft already, we'll load that in. So what we'll do is we'll set the value of the title element to be the draft title. And we'll create a variable that stores just the first draft. So that global draft variable will be set to just the first draft in the array, which will also be the only one. So we'll set the title element, or the title input, to be the draft's title. And we'll do the same with the draft body. We'll also just throw an error if there are more than one draft, which would make it so that we have some sort of other error. If you go to IndexedDB in your application tab, you can see that there are now 2 items created. The first one is that test note that I created with testing 1, 2, 3, test note and draft set to false, but now we also have an empty draft loaded in. So this one has the body of empty, draft set to true, and title set to empty string. Now the next thing that we'll need to do is we need to save the draft on page exit. So if I reload the page or if I close my tab, I need to save the draft that's currently typed into the input field. So I need to say, hi, my in progress note, and actually save that to the draft object. So what we'll do is we'll add another event to the page unload. Also, this weird being spelled wrong is driving me nuts, so I'm going to change that. I'm again going to get the values from the title and body form fields. So I'll grab that there. Now I want to also update my draft. So I'm going to do DataStore.save note copy of draft updated note This is the syntax to update an item within DataStore. So the updated note will be the note that I want to update, which will be this draft. Again, I have this stored to a global variable. And then I'll set the draft's title to the title from the form and its body to its body from the form. So now I should save my item when I reload the page. And you can see that it works. So when I refresh, my data loads in. Now the last thing that I need to do is when I submit the form, so when I create, it actually saves this note to the database as not a draft anymore. So we don't want it to be a draft anymore. We want to create a new empty draft. We will go back and update this create form submit here. We will change this right here and say await datastore.save, but instead of with a new note, it's going to be updating the existing draft the note title will be the title from the form, the body will be the body from the form, but it will no longer be a draft. So draft will be set to false. We'll also want to create a new draft. So we'll call this create new draft function here. And then we'll also want to set our title and our body to be empty strings. So we'll use this new draft's title and body. I kept my console log here, so that was that bug. And I ended up creating a draft when another one already existed. So that's messing everything up right now. I'm going to go back to the admin UI and you can actually delete things within here. So I'm going to delete this draft and this draft right here. I need to delete this console log right here. And there we go. Our full application is working. In a production use case, you would probably want to have users that would each have a draft instead of creating one global draft. You also may want to tweak your own collision rules for if a user edits the data on another device before they come back online, and you can do that through DataStore as well. So autosave patterns are really handy and can definitely soothe some user annoyance with going offline and lead to a better experience in general. And having performance that is awesome like this is really important for global accessibility for your applications. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to view more like it, please leave a thumbs up on this video. Also subscribe to my channel and click the alarm bell to view more. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next video.